As you can see, things got all funky real quick. There's probably some planet-eating type dude waiting for me up ahead. All yoked and powerful and trying to take over the world or something. But don't you worry, a hero descends. What? There are no heroes in this world? Oh, but there totally are. My name is Travis Touchdown. I'm the last hero around, here to save the world. I'm also just a passing assassin. Here we go. Taking a kill trip on Death Road.
It's been a while since we've seen Travis Touchdown on Nintendo console, and it's been a while since we've seen a Nintendo console on Digital Foundry, but today we're here to talk about both in one video. And to do so, I am joined by my dear friend and colleague, John Lindman.
Audie, this came out last week when I was away, and, well, finally, we get a chance to sit down and look at the game.
We get to be the last heroes.
That's right. But you're actually the hero of this story because this is I think the first sort of analysis video that you're taking the wheel on.
Yes, it is. This will be my first video doing this outside of a direct, and as I always joke, I'm sure people will notice this very well when they watch this video, but I'll do my best here. But speaking of doing our best, this is, of course, No More Heroes. It harkens back to the Wii. Let's talk a little bit about just the history of this game, because I think context is king when it comes to Suda 51 games.
Yes.
Because this is a game that came out for the Wii, I think in 2010, was it? 2009? Is it that old?
It's somewhere back then. I can't remember exactly when. It might even be older than that. But either way, it was a while ago.
Yeah, and this was a time where Nintendo was kind of angling for this sort of anti-Nintendo game. Remember, Mad World was another one. And then, of course, Suda 51 had always had a good relationship with Nintendo, with games like Killer 7. A lot of style, sometimes style over substance. But I think No More Heroes, at least in my opinion, was regarded as one of his best, combining elements of beat-em-ups, open world aspects, just sandbox.
Wrestling.
And of course, yes, I was going to say, all the references to other franchises and hobbies such as wrestling, American films, comics. This game series, and as well as this new game, is packed with them, and we'll talk a bit about that.
Of course.
And I believe, John, that the sequel came out, and that was also a Unreal game, wasn't it?
So I guess you could call it, it's more of a pseudo sequel, but basically Travis Strikes Again. Travis Strikes Again came out earlier on the Wii. I took a look at that on the channel, and I was relatively impressed. It's fairly basic visually and somewhat repetitive, but it's a fun game, and they managed to deliver a 60 frames per second action game on the Switch, which was pretty impressive despite the low-key visuals. So my thinking was, okay, this actually bodes very well for the next game, with the next game being No More Heroes 3. And there is a lot of good things to this, but also, at least on the technical side, well, they didn't quite deliver, we will say. Yeah,
this new sequel definitely does go back to that original template that we saw in No More Heroes 1 on the Wii. In many ways, I think we can say that it is very much a game that could belong in the era of the Wii. But we'll get into that. But let's talk a little bit about the core game before we go into the actual technical details here.
That's important because No More Heroes 2 and Travis Strikes Again both broke away from that original formula, right? But this one goes back to it, basically. This is more like the original.
This is much more like the original in many ways. And I think it's a welcome return for most fans. And for me, I enjoy that first game a lot. And when looking at the actual game here, it's a Suda 51 game. It's a lot of style. It's a lot of interesting elements. But essentially, this game is all about waves of enemies and boss fights inside these smaller arenas with the beam blade, I suppose you could say. And has very good fighting mechanics there. The game here introduces a bit more of a cooldown system, which I really appreciated. So I really enjoy just all the new elements they've added to the actual fights, as well, of course, as these nifty wrestling moves. It's always fun to perform them. Also, from the original, we have the return of a pseudo open world.
Yes, Santa Destroy, isn't it?
Santa Destroy, and we can even travel to other places here. This kind of acts as your world hub in the sense that you go around the city, you collect missions to raise money. You can mow the lawn if you so desire, or you can fight enemies. You can rank in fights. There are different aspects here, and generally the gameplay loop, I think, is rather good. It's probably among the better Suda51 games I played, just in terms of the core gameplay loop of just how fun and concise the fights are. They don't really drag on too long, and these boss fights are really nice set pieces. Each of the boss fights quite memorable.
They're super well done, very fast paced, very fun. And it does challenge you in some interesting ways, and I do think the controls work pretty well. I mean, obviously the original was designed around the Wiimote, and there are still some motion controls. For instance, if you play with the Joy-Con, you can still do the waggle thing for like recharging your sword and whatnot. But really, you know, it is.
You have to be very specific about the style of doing that.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, like you said, this is pretty much more No More Heroes, which I think is what a lot of us wanted. And I do like what they've done here. And that's especially true with the way it's presented. Obviously, this is something Suda games have long been known for. And it's extremely evident here. I mean, right from the beginning, the introduction to this game actually really grabbed me, where it's like, you know, it starts with a sort of history about this classic games or whatever. And you kind of get this weird look back at, what is it, like PC-88 looking games and like an arcade game as well. And so it kicks off with all of that. And then, of course, the actual story introduction kicks in with a fully animated sequence about a young boy and a strange alien named Fu. And obviously, you know, he escapes from there after their bonding exercise, and then eventually promises he'll come back, like, what is it, 20 years later or something? Something like that. And then he does, but he's kind of this crazy intergalactic murderous prince. And honestly, the stage for this I thought was really, really cool. I like it.
All these references, I mean, that's very much like an ET story gone wrong.
Gone wrong.
And so much of this with Suda51, he's someone that I think in the industry is special due to the way he manages to blend all these elements that shouldn't work. And honestly, I don't think they ever really do work, but that's why it works, if you know what I mean. Like, exactly. It's just a chaos.
It's just chaotic
of style. Everything is just chaotically put together with glue, and it somehow works so perfectly due to this. So I was happy to see that this game kind of, again, goes back to that original No More Heroes and brings that back to the forefront.
Now, it is funny you say it feels like it's put together with glue, though, because that does actually kind of apply to the technical side of things. I mean, so on the positive side, I actually do like the art direction. I think the character models are well done. It's true to the series. The new lighting model and materials made possible by using Unreal Engine, they actually look pretty good. The problem is that the image quality itself, like many other higher end Switch games, I think too much is compromised, basically, and you end up with this kind of blurry, muddy looking image that I feel actually detracts from what should have been a more superlative presentation, right?
I wouldn't say that this is a lack of optimization so much, but there are certain things going on here that kind of detract from it, like you say, and I think this is a game that really showcases the limits of what the Switch can do with this engine at this point, because there are certain aspects of it that look fantastic, like materials, some of the lighting effects, and also the effects during these fights. There is a lot going on screen, and the game holds up pretty well during these fight sequences.
Maybe we should establish then the image quality itself in terms of actual pixel resolution, because as usual, you got a docked and a portable res.
Yes, so in docked, it is 720p from my very rudimentary pixel counting. It does hold 720p. I felt like that there was some dynamic resolution changes happening here, but you actually explained it to me prior to recording that during these cutscenes, what's going on?
Yeah, so, I actually did other pixel counts here on the docked and portable mode and found every shot that I counted at least came out to 720p. So as usual with Unreal, there is always that chance for DRS, but I really didn't see it here in my experience. And the reason the cutscenes I think look clear is because, well, that's kind of where the TAA comes in. and there's these long, smooth edges, and the camera tends to be pulled in tighter in a way that you just get less like image noise from background elements, right? So the TAA actually does its job here. The problem is at 720p, when you're out in the larger areas, it just sort of smears things together a little bit too much. And this is multiplied by the poor texture filtering, where everything near the character just turns to soup. So you have these very blurry textures, a relatively low rendering resolution with AA that's not really great at 720p. And by the way, in portable mode, I counted 480p. So like 853 by 480 was what I was seeing there. So it definitely suffers in that regard.
Kind of felt like the game got even blurrier, so I wonder if it does in the open world drop to a lower resolution at certain times. I don't know how far out in the game you played.
Less than you, I think.
But it could also just be some sort of screen effect, because later on in the game, they actually do apply a lot of like weird like CRT effects and stuff.
Yes,
to the
they
screen.
do. They do.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. It's definitely one of those cases where I would almost argue that they would have been better off sort of defiltering the image, because the game goes for this stylish look. Like, rather than trying to smooth out all the pixels, just let it be raw, baby. You know, just like go straight raw 720p pixels. Maybe even like disable texture filtering or something. Like, make it really grungy and dirty, because it's already pretty smeared. So why not go the opposite direction?
Yeah, because they go for this sheen, the Unreal sheen here, and I totally agree with you that, like, I think just based on how this game kind of relies so much on the past, going for that raw look would have kind of helped it, I would think, to kind of consistently stay within that art style. Also, pop-ins from distance, and texture pop-ins, if you look here on this cutscene here. There's a full 4 seconds of like this texture just not being there, and then suddenly you get that detail, right?
Honestly, so, that's even more exacerbated. This, again, the open world. The thing is like you're in the city, but usually you rarely ever see more than one other car on the road. And even then,
you have to say "world" in quotation marks, because it's not living.
No, exactly. I mean, in a way, like the desolate kind of concept works to a degree, but they didn't run with it. So I think it's supposed to be populated, but there's usually like one pedestrian, one car at most. Occasionally you'll see two cars at once, but it really feels like they were trying to go too far and had to pull back at the end to make it like work on the Switch.
This is an aspect of the game that doesn't work as well as the other, and that being the open world. And it reminds me a little bit, not so much in the open world perspective, but you remember Dead Rising came to Wii.
Yeah.
It was all this like the lack of population and a detail there, and I feel like this is something similar, even though we don't have the reference to a stronger console at this point like we do with Dead Rising. But it does remind me of that, where, you know, on a good day you'll see a pedestrian or two walking around doing really nothing, but overall they don't add anything to the atmosphere or to the game. So it makes me wonder, like, why even bother at that point? It really doesn't make any difference.
So that's a bit of a shame, because I do like the game. It's just that, yeah, the open world stuff doesn't quite work technically. But what's also weird, and this applies differently depending on what you're talking about, is the performance. Okay, so I got to talk about this first, because this actually baffles me a little bit, the decisions they made here. First of all, there's the I guess you could say the mission sections, the boss fights, the missions, or even any of the arcade stuff. All of that stuff is designed to run with an uncapped frame rate. So it aims to hit 60 frames per second. And, you know, I benched the portable mode. You did the benchmarks on the docked mode. And I think we found that it's not really 60 most of the time. It's just kind of this, it can get there. Like some of the boss fights, especially the enclosed arenas, you get a lot of 60, but it's still relatively inconsistent.
Yeah, so as you can see here in docked mode, the game actually drops below 50 at times, like 45 to 47, and then goes up to 50 to 55 for the most part, and does reach 60, but not, though it seems to mostly stay around like the 50 range for these battle mode sequences, which is kind of impressive when you consider all the effects. but I gotta say that especially when you do play it in portable mode, which as you can see here, it's not that much of a difference in terms of the frame rate. It does usually hold in the 50s. I do notice some drops that are a little bit more severe in portable, but it looks great. These fighting scenes really do look among the best, I think, on the Switch for this type of game.
Okay, yeah, you're right. So if the whole game performed like this, I could at least forgive it. I'm not a huge fan of
if the whole game.
I'm not a fan of these uncapped frame rates like this, I have to admit, but it's okay. It's playable enough. The problem is when you get to the open world, I would almost say smartly if it worked better, but they capped the frame rate down at 30, which is actually what they do for the cutscenes as well. But the problem here is twofold, because firstly, they have that same issue that so many developers have run into when it comes to capping at 30 FPS, where the way they're capping the frame rate introduces bad frame pacing, where you get inconsistent frame time, so it's kind of jittery. I think Bloodborne or something. It's that kind of problem, which is...
It's not just jittery, though. I mean, when it loads in assets, it stops.
Well, so that's the other part. It's not just the bad frame pacing. The actual frame rate does drop. There's pausing as it loads in assets. So basically you have bad frame pacing, inconsistent frame rate, and like loading pauses all kind of happening, which again, it just makes it feel like the open world just doesn't really work on the Switch, which is why we really need a PC version of this.
Yeah, right.
Or like other console versions.
It's really shocking in that sense, because I think when I look at these fight scenes, very well optimized, by no means perfect, but as the game introduced all these new cooldown modes, the fights themselves don't get largely affected by some of these drops, and the boss fights are quite large set pieces, so it manages to kind of cinematically fit in within the frame rate it manages to hold. Of course, a perfect 60 lock would have been ideal, but just to be clear, it doesn't affect the game super negatively in the fight scenes. But then you go into this open world area, and it's kind of shockingly, I have no other words to say it, bad, because even though you say target 30, the game primarily hovers around 24 frames to 20, and the performance on handheld in this open world is even worse. I mean, when you take a look at this, it doesn't look great, does it? It's just highly inconsistent, and as you mentioned, jittery.
Okay, wow. Okay, so I kind of feel like that gives us a pretty good overview of the project then, I mean, I like No More Heroes 3. There's a lot of cool stuff here, and it does have the style. It's just that technically, there's definitely still more work to have been done, or I'm not even sure what's feasible given the hardware that they're targeting, but it just doesn't run as consistently or as well as it should, and ultimately the original Wii games kind of run better.
Kind of, and as I said at the top of this, it feels like a game that could have existed then on that hardware, and
which is not a bad thing, by the way.
No, absolutely not. The core gameplay loop is great, and in portable mode, you're looking at, similar to Wii, of course, in terms of performance. But I gotta say that playing this in a handheld was kind of like a treat. It's fun. Again, the Switch as a hybrid really allows for these great games to come to handheld.
Exactly.
So I can't complain too much. And to close it out, there's something to be said about Suda 51 games, is that sometimes, yes, style over substance, but I think fans of Suda, they're coming into this game with a certain expectation, and I think that expectation is being met with this game.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
It's really fun. The style is fun. The humor might not be for everyone. It's not always for me either, but I really just like the nonsensical, whatever sticks on the wall happens kind of style. It's wacky, it's fun, and I really sat down to enjoy this game after benchmarking it and get through the bosses and just see where the story went, because I never knew quite was about around the corner.
That's a good summary then. It's a good game. Yeah. It's throwing a lot of wild stuff at you. It's a Suda game, but it's technically rough, which I guess arguably that could also go hand in hand with some Suda projects. So, but with an uncapped frame rate, it could be seen that if we do get some sort of backwards compatible Switch in the future, that could help.
Super Switch could maybe help.
And hey, at least it runs better than Deadly Premonition 2 did, which was simply baffling in terms of performance. So,
yes, if you want to see an open world experience unlike any other on the Switch, play Deadly Premonition 2, pre-patch especially.
All right.
And you'll have a good time. But John, I think we are the last of the heroes here, and we did our heroic duty. We took a look at a new Switch game. It's been a while, but the fans can now leave happy as we looked at this new Unreal game on the platform.
Oh, and don't worry, I'll be back when Metroid hits, no doubt. Because I can't not look at that.
And I'll be very excited to see that, as well as the Switch OLED. That's
yes.
probably a game that's going to look very beautiful on that.
Cool.
That's going to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you liked this video, subscribe, ring the bell, follow us on Twitter, follow Digital Foundry on Twitter, and all that good stuff. If you want to support us, go to the Patreon, where we are making a lot of new shows, a lot of cool retro content if you're into that, a lot of behind the scenes footage.
Heck yeah.
There's a ton of content on that Patreon. Actually, fans are saying that we have one of the busiest Patreon feeds and they can't keep up. So it's an interesting problem to have, but it's one that I enjoy having. But John, I guess that is it for today. So thank you for joining me.
But of course.
And remember,
Always stop by the toilet if you find one, especially before boss fights. You need time to get your thoughts in order. So, save your damn game!